So I just wanted to touch on a recent research article that has been the subject matter for several general media and lay press articles over the last couple of weeks in relation to opioid use for lower back pain. Now, this study was originally conducted in Australia and published in The Lancet, which is a very prestigious journal and has been used to publish guidelines for treatment of certain conditions such as lower back pain. Now, the headlines to come out of this study were that opioid use is not effective for lower back pain and shouldn't be recommended, essentially as a blanket statement. And it was even suggested by the authors that the Lancet update their current guidelines for lower back pain to essentially not recommend the use of opioids at all. So just as a bit of background, I think most people are familiar with the term opioid and at least have some understanding of the class of drugs that they come under and the fact that they're quite a strong analgesic medication. Opioids are some of the oldest analgesic medications that we have in the history of pharmacology. They act on the opioid system, so we have these opioid receptors at a number of different locations throughout our nervous system, right from the brain through to the peripheral nerves. And this opioid system has an important role in the regulation of pain responses. So when we ingest opioids, they bind with these opioid receptors, and that leads to a dulling of that pain response. They also act on the endocrine system, and this triggers a release of a large amount of dopamine, which I think most people are aware is that happy drug. So opioids are essentially a family of medications. We have opiates, which are the naturally occurring compounds, which is sort of natural alkaloids found in the resin of the opium poppy. And these refer to drugs such as codeine and morphine. We then have semi-synthetic compounds, which are the drugs that start with things like oxy and hydra, so your oxycodone, oxymorphone, drugs like that. And then we have fully synthetic compounds such as fentanyl and methadone. Some of the issues with opioids, as we alluded to before, because of the dopamine released when these drugs are taken, it can produce a sense of euphoria. And it's this euphoria that increases the likelihood of addiction. People essentially get addicted to the high that the drugs produce. And so drugs like heroin, which is one of the strongest opioids out there, is obviously a very problematic illicit drug. And it's this sense of euphoria that draws people to the drug and causes that addiction. There's also the risk of tolerance. So if people are taking the drug regularly, they become tolerant in that more of the medication is required to have that same effect, and then they can also become dependent on them. So there's certainly issues with opioids, and most people will have heard of the issues in certain parts of the world with prescription of opioids because of these problems of addiction and tolerance and dependence that they cause. However, because of these issues that have been raised, the prescribing rights around opioids have been changed and have become a lot stricter in many parts of the world. So whilst in past years there was this opioid epidemic where they were vastly overprescribed, in a lot of parts of the world, if anything, it's actually too difficult for doctors to prescribe opioids. So whenever the results of studies like these are being published in lay press, where many people are going to be reading them, and those people are not medically educated, and the messages in those articles have the potential to alter health behaviours. It's important that the articles that have been referenced are of a high methodological quality, and also that they're actually asking and then answering the right questions. When we look at this study, there are quite a number of flaws. The first one is the size of the study. So there were around 350 participants, of which 20% were lost to follow-up. And that's not a large number of participants. If we have 300 people in a physiotherapy or a sports science study, we're over the moon. We can get a lot of useful data out of that. But in pharmacology, that's just underpowered to answer the question at hand. In terms of subject selection, these subjects were selected, the participants were recruited if they had had pain up to 4 weeks. So if they'd had back pain in the last 4 weeks. And the back pain could be from mild to moderate. The outcomes of the study, so essentially they gave one group a placebo and the other group an opioid medication, and they were reassessed at 12 weeks. Now, this just simply isn't the way that opioid medication is used. Opioid medication is used to treat severe acute back pain or acute pain. And so you wouldn't give these medications to people with mild to moderate pain, and in general you wouldn't give it to someone who's had this pain for 4 weeks. These medications are used in the early stages if other medications or other interventions have been unsuccessful, to try and settle acute pain. We know that even if we settle the acute pain in general with acute lower back pain, there's not a lot that's going to change someone's outcomes at 12 weeks. But that's not really what we're using the medication for. We're using it to settle acute symptoms. If someone has acute pain and they can't get out of bed, you're not really thinking about what state you're going to be in 12 weeks. You may have work that you need to get back to. You may be caring for a family. The important thing at that point is getting moving, being able to function. It may be interrupting your sleep to the point where you're not sleeping at all. Really, that's where opioid medication or any stronger analgesic medication really has its role. So to be assessing these people at follow-up 12 weeks later doesn't really make sense. One of the exclusion criteria was that they had serious pathology. Now, they didn't really go into a lot of detail about what that serious pathology was, but excluding people with serious pathology, obviously if they have non-musculoskeletal pathology such as tumours, that's a different story. But if someone has a serious musculoskeletal pathology, they're the ones that are likely to require this opioid medication. So again, there are a few issues with subject selection. And then there was a medication they used, which was Targene, which is a medication that's not actually approved for the treatment of lower back pain. Targene is a combination of oxycodone and naxolone, and it's essentially a slow-release opioid. They used this variation because they wanted to limit the side effects to help with the randomization of the study. So they didn't want the participants who were in the actual research group, so the ones taking the opioid, to know that they were taking the opioid and not the placebo. The problem with this was that many of the participants did notice the side effects, so that they knew that they weren't taking the placebo. And then the other main problem is that the study was based on a medication that is not actually approved for use for the condition that they're actually treating. A lot of researchers will have their biases to different degrees. There were some quotes within the paper which more directly pointed to her stronger biases. She quoted that 70% of patients were receiving opioids by their GP when they presented for lower back pain. However, these are not current statistics. As we talked about before, since the issues that have been raised with opioid use, the prescription rights of doctors have changed in a big way. And so it's no longer the case where a lot of patients will be prescribed opioids for lower back pain. So again, we're seeing some false statistics there that sort of raise questions about the true agenda of this paper. So from a personal perspective, as someone who has seen people suffering lower back pain or acute lower back pain of differing severities, and as someone who's experienced lower back pain myself and has had 2 very severe episodes of lower back pain, I've seen how people respond to opioid medication, and on those 2 episodes where I experienced back pain where I basically wasn't able to move, opioid medication was effective in helping me overcome that very severe acute pain in the early stages. So I certainly understand the risks associated with opioids, and I would by no means someone who would urge their client to speak to their doctor about opioid medication as a first-line intervention. And perhaps in the future we will have evidence to show that opioids are no more effective than placebo for acute back pain. However, at the moment we don't have that evidence, and particularly with this paper, it certainly doesn't add any weight to the argument that opioid medication should not be recommended for lower back pain under any circumstances. Now, obviously not in a position to prescribe analgesics, and certainly not in a position to recommend people either way, but because this I've seen this paper referenced in a number of general media articles, I think it was important to just highlight some of the issues that are likely not seen when you're reading this in a newspaper or an online news forum. So I hope that has been useful and interesting to some people. So if you do see some of these articles that reference recent research in relation to health and fitness and medicine, and you'd like to know our thoughts and our current understanding of the research, then let us know, and we'd be happy to share our knowledge and experience. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.